the country. So we spoke about short-term rental, we spoke about rent gap. Now we are speaking about how neoliberal term urban policy really boosted urban rehabilitation markets and really gave some, importance to real estate investment funds, the new rent law of 2012, the revision of the municipal master plan that really liberalized the urban soil and it really made easy for old houses with people in it to evict the people and put those houses in the national urban rehabilitation market. Of course, boosting real estate capital and investment. Now, the last axis has to do with housing financialization. With all that narrative that I spoke to you about, naturalization of touristification and stately gentrification with the financialization of real estate dynamics, as you know, the Portuguese government created two main programs, the non-permanent residence and golden visa program, that attracted a lot of foreign investment and boosted housing financialization. So really attracted the new demands of the transnational capitalist elite to new middle classes to Lisbon. So this is setting the scene, okay? Of course, all this really, as a result of this, the volume of real estate intervention, of physical and architecture improvements became increasingly visible. We have urban regeneration, we have urban rehabilitation, we have public space beautification. The city is more beautiful, the city is more vibrant, the city is more boosted and creative. But this was a result of a dark side promoted by stately gentrification and urban regeneration. As a matter of fact, I would say that urban regeneration in this period is an euphemism. I don't know if you say this in English. Yes, euphemism. People know what I'm talking about. So the result is the enormous skyrocketing of the housing prices in historical neighborhoods that just created a domino effect all over the city and all over the great metropolitan areas, and now is affecting, of course, all the country. Rent prices and housing prices just climb very rapidly. And without any kind of regulation and moderated control over these rent increases, of course, the eviction process expand to more aggressive forms of neighborhood real estate promotion, and all these approved with the state legislation that facilitated private initiatives to evict local inhabitants and retailers and to promote upper and middle class market homeowners that seek to advantage the area's enhanced notoriety, and this will produce further displacement. So given all the urban contradictions generated by the omnipresence of this economic and financial crisis, with the negative impacts that this has on housing local markets by touristification and transnational gentrification, most of the inner city districts were affected by tourism accommodation, financialization of housing, luxury real estate, new middle classes demands, and of course, nothing would be more expected than a resurgence of urban protest movements. I will speak about the beta. I have my research on this case covered several associations, several collectivities. I'm talking about Morar em Lisboa, Living in Lisbon, Habita, Stop Eviction, Stop Despejos, Left Hand Rotation, Lisbon Tenants Association, so different collectives and associations, and basically they all fight for the right to housing. Basically, they all belong to several international networks. They try to mobilize activists as trainees and even the communities to speak louder and to protest and to pressure the political authorities to do some changes. But I would say that when we speak about all these different associations, and I did semi-structural interviews with all of them, including a network, Age Network, that is not a social movement, but is a scientific network. What makes them together and unifies the right to housing as a theme in these in their strategies is that they try to not just defend the right to housing, but also the right to statehood and the right to the city, and try to maintain that equal access to everybody in the city, to try to be able to appropriate several social and inclusive spaces, collective spaces in the city. So they also, not just the BITA, but all the movements that I mentioned, try to see housing market, the right to housing and housing market dynamics as a path to urban development that should be a part of a more participatory public policy in terms of fighting all forms of real estate speculation. When you see the house as a financial asset and a commodity. Also, they claim to promote public affordable housing, more compatible with the people needs and people incomes, and adequate and integrated affordable housing in the social consolidated tissue of the city. They also forced more stop evictions and Evita. They also forced self-organization, awareness in people. When, for instance, Lisbon Tenants Association promotes social cooperative service to the tenants that is paid, for instance, and IGOT-ULisboa, for instance, also shapes, I would say, and sensitize the public opinion and makes people more aware of the problematic. Also, they try to promote and formulate alternative policy proposals, and I would put, if I could do like a spectrum for more conservative, not conservative, maybe more institutional and more formal, and between formal, institutional, and more informal and more grassroots and radical movement, I would put Lisbon Tenants Association in the most institutional and formal modes of organization of collectivities, and then going in the spectrum, going to the more radical, I would have IGOT-ULisboa, and then I would have Evita in a more radical and grassroots movement, and then I would have stop evictions. Okay, so this is just a way to put. They are all different, but this menu that I'm presenting here of the main claims, I would say it's the most important thing. But it unifies these different movements with different natures and different features. So, because my time is also, so despite all this big complexity and diversity of grassroots actors at play, and now I'm quoting Simon Turmelu, he says that emergent struggles have had in common the capacity to play on different arenas. It's a concept that, for instance, Guya uses a lot, and that I try to study also and try to be more informed on. They have different strategies. All these movements, they have this common menu, these common claims, but they have different strategies, and they compose these different strategies. So they seek media visibility, they negotiate with institutional actors, they act in the confrontational way, a more oppositive way, but they also produce alternative data. So, but especially there's a explicit goal of fighting against the commodification and financialization of housing in the post-austerity Lisbon. So this is what maintains them different but heterogeneous and coming together in the collective and unitary effort to make a difference. So the COVID pandemic took us by surprise. It exposed unexpected pressure on families, essential public services, demanded challenges in economic and society and labor. We are all going through a health, a socio-economic crisis like we never lived before. Now we have a crisis that is also aggravated by the invasion and the conflict, the military conflict in Ukraine. But the outbreak of COVID-19 and all the measures of social distance took people and status by surprise. And it brought about a lot of changes to profound routine practice. Now, regard to the access of the right to housing, of course, it was impossible to guarantee the application of the preventive measures. So how can you maintain personal hygiene and guaranteeing distance and social isolation when you live overcrowded, when you don't have water and soap to clean your hands? During this process, I was engaged with a small project of 6 months. Como é que chama o projeto da Joana Pestana e Silva Jorge? É o Ficar em Casa. Acho que é o Ficar em Casa, não é? Como Ficar em Casa. I don't remember, but the project is very interesting. It's focused on women and on gender. And we visited Terras da Costa, which is I don't know if you know, it's that small shanty neighborhood that exists behind Costa da Caparica, between the village of Costa da Caparica and the Riba. Okay, there's some, we think that's from agriculture, but it's not. People live there. 60%, from 60 to 80% live there. And basically Cape Verde people, migrants. And we did some workshops with the population to try to, and they only have water. There's only one torneira, one tap with good water, but for all the 80%, they don't have water in their shanties. They don't have water in their houses. So can you imagine how can we maintain hygiene and social distance? We know home, we know house. So again, how can we quarantine if you don't have a house? How can we think about social isolation when we have overcrowded houses? So the collectives and the urban social movements made all these contradictory consequences pre-COVID, made them more aware during the COVID times and made this thing. You cannot have health standards if you don't have a housing rights. Okay, so different strategies were put into practice. I mean, I can start with the manifesto, How Can You Quarantine Without a Home? It's an example of institutional negotiation. I mean, this manifesto was produced by the Association Habita and the collective Stop Despejos, were subscribed by 60 associations in like 4 days. These were produced like in 3-4 days. And it just has parallel with Morar em Lisboa. But Morar em Lisboa movement was created for like 4 months. Before January 2017, took 4 months of negotiations. We are talking about 60 associations in this manifesto in 4 days. This was like very innovative and very, innovative and pertinent. So they gave rise to this petition, this manifesto, that immediately in a few days gathered 3,000 signatures. So this manifesto it was an open letter to society and to public authorities, and He called for the immediate end of evictions, the immediate resettlement of all evicted people and their families, and those that were living in the streets. So we are talking about people that live in the streets, sorry. Homeless people, sorry. So they need to be relodged, of course. The requisition, this was a very important proposition, the requisition of empty houses, that, for instance, the tourists in the luxury and municipal apartments that are empty can be put at service of the right to housing and to emergency resettlements. They also ask for the suspension of the payment of the rent for all tenants in national territory that were affected by the crisis, the suspension of the payment of housing loans and mortgages, and the suspension of rent for social houses, and also for social spaces like associations, etc. And especially also for small businesses that were very affected by the crisis and had the suspension of income. This petition sensitized thousands and thousands of people in civil society and helped to it triggered again the most primary contradictions of this problem that we have, this structural problem of right to housing in the political and public agenda. This collective effort associated with various memorandums that the Lisbon Tenants Association that also signed this manifesto, but at the same time, and I'm in both. I'm a member of ABITA, but I'm the board member of Lisbon Tenants Association, and this was done in the same weekend. When we sent the memorandum to Antonio Costa, to the Prime Minister, this manifesto came into light. And all these strategies coming together, produced in those weeks of March 2020, right? March 2020, really made pressure in the Prime Minister, in the entire government, and the parliamentary groups, and had an effect. Because few days after, the government discourse promotes several measures adopted, and it was suggested that by this recessionary moment of COVID-19, all the evictions should be suspended, the rental legislation should be suspended when we think about ending contracts, and so it would be prolonged. This moratorium of evictions would be prolonged until the end of the contingency period. So landlords could not promote eviction, could not promote the end of the rent contract with the tenants during this period. Okay, so resistance from home. Of course, everybody, I would love to start. Maybe we can see the video in the end of left-hand rotation, the trailer of Street. I don't know how the name of the video, but it's quite interesting because it makes us think about all the shutdown and how all the measures, the protective measures that were created to create a lockdown urbanism, I would say. Some authors speak of it. During the pandemic, really restrict the capability of urban social movements and associations to go to public space and manifest in demonstrations, performance, their claims. So we can say that the pandemic really restricted the capability of these social movements to promote their claims in a public space. But at the same time, it obligated them to be more creative and have invent new innovative strategies, a different performative sense to try to contradict all this prohibition of circulate and being in the streets. So how can we continue to resist, but from home? So this was a primary issue to a lot of social and collective movements that were confronted those days. I would like to stress some strategies that I think are very relevant in this field to understand how they come to overcome this difficulty of being in public space. Virtual platform assemblies, strategy number one. They don't have an order, but I'm just identifying them. The creation of a network of studies on housing with H network, REDH, in the academic level, and also email bombing, for instance. Of course, we have the presentations in the balconies. Guya spoke of that in the seminar, I remember very well. It was very interesting to see everybody doing performative. Even 25 de Abril, people put the sound of 25 de Abril in the windows and to people in the street to hear. It was like very emotional. Everybody that knows what 25 de Abril means for us. It's an emotional way of promoting liberty, even when you are closed at home and you are in lockdown. So email bombing, of course, the balcony that I didn't study, and the local networks of mutual support. I would say that these are the main strategies. Regarding the first, so the meetings, Habita has weekly assemblies, and in the last months of pandemic, these assemblies were done in Zoom by digital platforms. They discussed the weaknesses, the strengths, the strategies of struggles. They discussed with the victims of eviction and the threats of eviction. And those assemblies were crucial moments to empower these most vulnerable victims of residential segregation and to encourage socialization and collectivization of problems. So the aim was not to find individual solutions, but to think a collective, to make people, that's what we call socialization of the problem, to make everybody in the collective think about the solutions to be taken collectively and to strengthen class consciousness. So this is consciousness, sorry, this is very important. So all these presential meetings were no longer possible. So the abolition of the right to resistance established during the state of emergency really made absent the face-to-face meetings. And this started to take place on digital platforms, as I said, and other online social networks. The second strategy, these are some strategies of, even though we had, the lockdown of public space and so on, a lot of different demonstrations were promoted in the open air, especially when it was possible. Okay, some boards that were promoted during the digital campaigns. There was an important board and strategy made by the especially Stop Evictions in Habita that were every activist created like a board in their house and publicized in with no face, just a board, publicized in the social networks. And I couldn't find it in the internet. I think that Tiago and Guya has that. They should have. It was very important to maintain certain phrases and slogans like the pandemic is not a crisis, capitalism is a crisis. So they created this kind of political slogans, but it has nothing to do with this one. This is created by the Ação pela Habitação movement, and it was a campaign disclosed in social media. But another important strategy was the network H. Hey, we are here. Try to find us. We are here. So this, when we formed this since June 2019, we just wanted to, like, of course, the network H was founded in February 2020, but we were in conversation, and everybody knows here, we were in conversation since June 2019. So this is the National Housing Studies Network. This network brought together, that time, 60 people. Now we are more than 1,050, 150 people, academics especially, and activists, civil society actors, and they all are united for their interest in studying the topic of housing. Now, in mid-March 2020, before the declaration of state of emergency, we published an open letter to the Portuguese government and society and addressed several urgent measures to be implemented in order to strengthen the right to housing in the pandemic period. Now, this open letter really marks the beginning of a path of reflection and active participation in the debate of housing in Portugal during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. Although this network really began to be formed in June 2019. At the time, we wanted to exchange more experience between different scientific projects and studies on housing, tourism, and social movements. Now, those 60 now, I would say 80, by then 80 individuals are a part of a network. They understand that the measures approved by that time in March 2020 by the Parliament, such as the suspension of evictions, the effect of termination of rental agreements, the execution of mortgages, all those measures also promoted by the City Council, such as the suspension of evictions of the social housing park, are positive. These measures are positive, but they are still very insufficient in the view of today's needs. So they say, this network and the open letter says that under a high risk of non-compliance with the housing basis law and all the national contingency plan for COVID-19, as well as other circulars and other important documents by the General Directorate of Health and the Minister of Health, they request immediately compliance with a set of measures that are target housing and are the following. Just very what this open letter stands for. So mobilize the available spaces and empty spaces to meet the self-isolation and quarantine compliance in order to avoid the risks of individual, family, and public health. Immediate use, if necessary, requests, I mean, really compelling request by the state to benefit people that are in a situation of homelessness and poor people, poor families living in very extreme, bad housing conditions or overcrowded, victims of domestic and gender violence, workers in precarious housing, even health professionals. These groups need to be urgently provided house with. And they also ask for the automatically extinction of the end of rental contracts during the period of COVID-19. So the main network, H network, has two main objectives. The first one is to relate to the research carried out in the field of housing studies, and the second one has to do with the approximation of housing studies with a non-academic context. And this is quite important because we can speak about the collaborative development that several research in the field of housing studies have, to facilitate the creation of projects, working groups, to articulate different territorial contexts, to bring together different individuals and groups with their specific, research items, to avoid overlap studies, etc., to share results, data, work data, raw data. But especially, I think that the most important objective that I would like to stress in this context is the second one, that has to do with the visibility that this age network wants to give to the housing studies outside the academic context and other contexts specifically interested in the topic, like activism or real estate. We have real estate promoters in our network. We have activists in our network, and they all come along. Of course, scientific members are the basic huge group of this network, but we also have those kinds of functions. So I would like to stress, and I love this frame by Rita Alves and Roberto Falanga from 2019, all the types of engagement and of academics with activism and back and forth, politicians, and we have two different types of engagement: the more peripheral, more marginal one, and the more institutional one. This is a paper that I really recommend you guys to read because it's in Portuguese, but it's very important for me. It's something like the Guya work or the work of Tiago in the austerity period is something that we can quote for decades, because I think we are talking about very important work as a reference. And here I would like to stress the second objective, that is the production of alternative data and to contribute to public deliberation and active participation in the public debate. So we should facilitate the access to journalists, politicians, technicians, and other interested parties to studies, to research results, to our political proposals also that are mainly technical and scientific, but are important to stimulate the public debate and the housing debate and to increase the necessary knowledge in this field. But above all, the network age favors the approach of scientific world and its habitus, like Pierre Bourdieu advocate, that approaches scientific universe to the practical field of activism, and to mobilize the participation of several researchers and members of the network in activism in the last years, with the production of reports, opinions, political participation, in consultation, technical and scientific, also in political parties, and even in different organs of institutional democracy and the legal system. For instance, the Lisbon Municipal Assembly, the Parliament's Housing and Land Planning Committee. We are talking about different organisms that really influence institutional environment to adopt social measures to the right to housing. So I think this link between academic activists and academic and politics, it's quite important. Because it's a way to pressure political power and to influence the political measures legitimized by scientific knowledge, and to base public decisions legitimized by technique and science. So this can produce alternative scientific knowledge in addition to escape the status quo and more positivist and hegemonic paradigm of scientific production that usually sees being an activist as losing objectivity. I don't give a damn about it. And I would say that a lot of scientists that are involved in this, especially the social ones, don't give a damn about it. It has nothing to do objective. Of course, we are always, as scientists, we are always, we look for the truth, but the truth is not universal, it's universal, it's fragmented, it's local, as Boaventura de Sousa Santos says. So we must try to be more involved in praxis, not practical moments, but praxis, you know, the activist praxis, which is the refractive practice of doing activism and bringing conclusions to the scientific world and then rethink it in the scientific world and then gave back to the activism movement with no kind of prejudice that science is a more superior knowledge than the practical activist knowledge. Science is no more important than religion. Science is no more important than Native American or Native Indigenous Africa, whatever tribes paradigm of living. So all knowledge, all forms of knowledge and trying to work with the truth and trying to, you know, are equal importance. So I would say that Age Network, with all this promotion of types of engagement, really is promoting a different way of doing scientific production because it feeds civical intervention and active citizenship practices. Now, another strategy is email bombing. My time is finished, right? So I really, just very simply, to put this very simply, I think that this is very interesting strategy. Email bombing, I don't know if you've heard of it, is something that International Amnesty uses. They are so clean, right? And so they are so straightforward, but they use email bombing. And between, especially in April 8, this was a strategy that was organized in April 8 in midday, thousands of activists and citizens would simultaneously send an avalanche of electronic messages to the same recipients, in the case, political sovereign bodies. So we're talking about the Prime Minister, the Minister of Housing, the Secretary of State of Housing. I like so much of them, I really do. But I feel, but this is a terrorist strategy. Because it's a social terrorist strategy, because not the terrorist sense of, you know, the most serious, but it's it feeds the flood of email boxes of sovereignty bodies with the demands by the activist groups, and using internet. This email bombing is a form of course, net abuse that consists in sending a large volume of email to an address and to try to attempt overflow in the mailbox of these authorities. So this mass mailing to is a common strategy used by organizations like the International Amnesty, and the objective is not so much a practical one. So it's not just to send numerous duplicate mails to the same email. The objective is not just to block service or you know, try to block and freeze the institutional emails, but to act in a more oppositive and confrontational way. You know, it's like a symbolic strategy to alert. Yes, I know. Tiago said it. Okay. Yes, it's a way to, like, it's a symbolic strategy. Thank you. To alert and to dramatically wake up politicians and political authorities to the need to robust intervention in the housing field in the pandemic crisis. I will later on tell you how email works. I cannot state this because this is being recorded and disclose it, but I will disclose, not for you guys at home, I'm sorry, But when the record is finished, I will disclose with, this is the positive thing of being this. It's different to be here in the audience. I had to give something different. And so I will give you something that came in the Lisbon Times Association email sent by the Housing State Secretary. And it has to do with this, with email, and how we can use email to call the attention for public authorities. Okay, so I will now talk about we have a fourth strategy that is the local help mutual groups. A lot of these activisms were involved in local cantinas. You know, a lot of the associations like Habita Civigaita, Zona Franca dos Anjos, RDA, all these different collectives, especially in Anjos, were transformed in local canteens. You all heard of the Ciara eviction, right? So this was a kind of also mutual support group. A lot of activists worked in voluntary activism to try to give help to these people in need, homelessness, the people with no alternative. And just to stress this important thing and idea in this fourth strategy, that this was not just to satisfy the basic needs of these vulnerable groups with a hot soup or a hot meal, 2 meals a day. No, it was not just like that. It was to strengthen social class conscience, okay? Through a word, through an exchange of knowledge, to maintain these people together and to promote critical thinking in these people. Final considerations and remarks. So I would say that currently, with the pandemic crisis of COVID-19, a new wave of protests seems to have revived the theoretical debate on praxis of urban social movements and the collective action, not just on public space, but in everyone's individual home, pushing the reinvention of strategies of resistance, even in times of lockdown. Now, the post-austerity social movements have been called again the attention to the academic, to the public opinion, and the civil society and the media and the political power. And especially in this period, the contradictions of the capitalist mode of production, especially the production of urban space as we know it, gained relevance and exposed the brutality of the inequalities in access to the right to housing. Now, this is a situation associated with the narrative of a panoptic moral duty of self-government through forced and compulsory lockdown in order to respect the compliance with the sanitary rules of public health authorities, further make evident the brutality cases of residential segregation, evictions, and special injustice, not just social, but territorial and special injustice. So associations, collectivities, social movements in defense for the right to housing were able, once again, this is my thesis, to capitalize on these aspects and anchored the urban struggle in housing and human rights essential to life by conquering even temporary and exceptionally important objectives as suspensions of evictions, suspension of mortgage payments, resettlement of the most vulnerable on Airbnb and hotel rooms, imposing the right to housing on the right to property, and setting precedents that can be useful for the post-COVID social struggles. Now, in recent dramatic expansion of the pandemic, and I'm just finishing, the intervention of this association was essential. as we see, to compel the representative democracy to understand and act in accordance with the categorical imperative of defending the housing for all. Some more moderated, others more radical, others more institutional, others more grassroots. All of them reveal an effort to participatory citizenship towards another alternative political agenda. But the greatest value of this broader spectrum of intervention, very differential, as we saw, precisely because they are very diverse, but above all because they are very heterogeneous and complementary, gave integration and unity to this struggle. And so we now are more able to provide a capitalization of culture of participation and critical intervention in civil society, as well as to mobilize collective learning that was developed in post-austerity urban struggles and now is provided with new strategies for the period of pandemic times. I would say also that to finish, really finish, that another city is possible. And this, there was, I think that the development of these social movements and association created the beginning of a reflection, of a transition for a more initial phase of very spontaneous and localized actions to another discourse, another project of critical intervention in the city, in terms of thinking not just housing, but connecting the right to housing with the right to statehood, with the right to the city, with the right to green environment, with the right to mobility, transport, public space, different arenas of urban development. And I would say that that kind of global intervention in the city in terms of critical participatory mobilization is one of the main key aspects that we can say we achieved. Now, these urban struggles, they set several strategies and several conclusions and reflections that are important for us to think in a very political and more integrated vision. So we know that to be more political innovative, to do really transformative change in urban space, and this is a thesis for me, and Tiago knows I always say this, is to connect the civic society, the political arena, and the science arena. When you overlap these three arenas, the political, the scientific, academic, and the civil society, when I call civil society, I'm talking about activism, and these three arenas coming together, for me, are the key to promote urban change and more transformative practice in urban social movements and urban collectives and associations. So I would like to really leave you with this. This is the lesson, I would say, that I wanted to bring for you today. And thank you so much for your attention with my bad English and the density and all the unorganized ideas that I try to bring to you guys. Thank you so much.
Well, we have some time for questions here at home, so maybe we can close the PowerPoint.
You want to see if there are any questions in the...
Well, we have Victor and Amy. Do you guys at home want to ask us something?
And also here.
And also here, but
they are muted.
They are muted, but they can.
Can they?
Yeah.
Open the mics. Okay, Amy, Victor, are you there? Do you want to expose some thoughts on this? Or here, even here, we have, there's a question there, maybe.
Luca.
Okay. I don't know, they really don't speak. They didn't say nothing. Maybe they just follow through.
Go for it.
Oh, thank you very much. It was a pleasure speaking. So I have question. I mean, a lot of notes here, but maybe I have a fair question because it goes a little bit, not in another sense, but goes beyond the realm of the presentation. But some notes on the inside the presentation. But you told a lot about the initiatives and the networks that were developed during this period between activists and between other organizations. I would like to know which kind of organization do part of these networks, and also like if it's connected with other activist networks like LGBTQ, plus activists or queer activists, or also decolonial activists. Also, I really want to know how do you think that they could impact the social movements? At least these social movements, if they are different from the beginning of the pandemic and from today, and how they change the threats, the actions, the participants, and these. And also one thing that's more connected to the national education. Do you think that because it changes something on this dynamic, or it's still happening in the same way that it was happening before?
Very good questions.
Sorry for all of these questions.
No, three main important questions. Victor left us, but I can rephrase them to Amy because I maybe she didn't hear you. Amy, I don't know if you are there, but I can rephrase them. Are there any more questions? No, we can do a first round if you want. No? Okay, so Amy, what's your name? Luca said here was he posed three questions. The first one is how the network organization between all these different collectives deal with gender and post-colonial movement or paradigm. No,
who is part of this network? If it's included also other networks or other activist networks that you work with this question.
The networks.
They are part of this network also, or if they are not connected.
Okay, well, exactly. But I will take the opportunity to speak about gender and colonial, post-colonial paradigm also. The second question that Luca posed has to do with how did the impact that pandemic COVID had in the social movements and its organization and strategies. And the third one has to do with how COVID changed gentrification and the real estate dynamics, as I understand it. So, first of all, I would say that basically the international when we speak about network organization, we can say that the pre-COVID strategies of the social movements were well connected with network organization. We had different moments like Festival Ação pela Habitação, we had Morar em Lisboa movement, we have different groups and activities and strategies that show that when these movements come together, they really unify in the unitary platform and they are more, their voice goes deeper, okay? So it's important, deeper in a social and a political sense. But most of these networks also function in the international and transnational level. And this is quite important because there's a lot of exchange of knowledge and good practices. I don't like the word, but you understand what I'm trying to say. And the best experiences and tactics between different collectivities when we work with PA, the Plataformas Afetadas de Hipoteca, or Plataformas Afetadas de Hipoteca, yes, or when we work with SET, the Southern European Cities Against Justification, or when we work with the European Coalition to the Right to Housing. So we have to learn, we learn a lot with them, you know? And so there's an exchange of knowledge and good practices that is quite important. Another thing is that basically, I speak of it in the paper. The paper, really, I mean, you guys, the paper is much better than the presentation. So I have a section in the paper dedicated to the new features of these new social movements. That is something that is all over the new literature on social movements, the modern literature on social movements. They are autonomous. They are not so dependent of that basic contradiction between capital and labor. They are outside the union's labor sphere. Sometimes they reject the political agenda. They are very straightforward and against the political agenda. I have some of them here. They are, for instance, another feature is that they have layers of educated youth. They are conveyed by the cyberspace. They are marked by flexible organization, networking. Usually they don't have identified leaders because they are very horizontal networks. But the leader, for me, as an activist and experience, that's another lesson. Leadership culture is everything in these movements, because we now are seeing with the pandemic, as some of the leaders, the traditional leaders of these movements go away, the movements start to, crumble. Especially because they didn't bet in something that is very important. That is to transfer knowledge, collective knowledge. Every social movement, every collectivity, every association has social and cultural capital. And if you don't start transferring that capital, that collective memory to the more young, generations, there will be a gap. And there can be problems in maintaining, the action and the line of intervention of those collectivities. They also are very marked by performative and dramatic arts. Usually they are unrelated with any kind of political program. They reveal a lot of spontaneity, and as I said, they try to connect different aspects of their claims. It's not just a right to housing, as I said. It's the right to a different city, a different model, a different paradigm of a contemporary city, a more collective one, a more social one, based in social appropriation, livable, more green, sustainable city, and less connected with profit and real estate, capital promotion or something like that. So we can also, of course, criticize the creative city. The creative city for more than 10 years now, as you know, as Richard Ford already addressed, he made this mea culpa, and in the how do you call it, the urban crisis, right after the creative city, 10-year delay, maybe 10-year delay book or 15-year delay book that really acknowledges his mea culpa to putting the paradigm of creative city in the political agenda with not addressing the social impact and the dark social collateral damages that it promoted by the vibrant and boosted economies in the inner city of the cities. So, of course, there are a lot of these movements and collectivities, they are connected with the post-colonial and the gender and other kind and the new environmental, in the right to in feminists, also contradiction or claims, minorities, LGBTQ plus something, everything. It has to do with the frame and the big lesson that social movements understand nowadays, that to change society, to be transformative, they have to unify different contradictions. All of that you mentioned, Luca, are different aspects of contradiction of capitalism, in my point of view. But I'm a structuralist. You understand? I'm a structuralist. So I believe that these different, thank you, these different aspects are, I wouldn't say small contradictions, but are secondary contradictions from the main one, that is between capital and labor. This has to do more with identity and not so much with class. But to a social movement to be innovative, he has to integrate this secondary, as the most orthodox authors claim, secondary causes and claims. We saw that in Seattle movement, when we, get together all these collectivities and all these claims are come together to promote a different world, an alternative world. The hypothesis of transformation is higher, and nothing changed in the real estate housing dynamics because we are in a capitalist mode of production of urban space. Nothing changed. As a matter of fact, it changed the narrative. People want to live in places, the new demands, the new residential demands, especially the elite or the new middle class, as we call it, they want to live in a more open space, more connected with nature. They require more space in their domestic housing, in the domestic architecture of house and design. And they are more connected with nature and environmental claims, I would say, because the pandemic really posed that biopolitical, statement that you need to be more apart from each other. We have to call it social distance or something like that. That we know it's like isolation or more. And definitely, when we see the golden visa law, for instance, changing from urban space to rural and more interior areas of the country, we see that narrative of the pandemic, just being very close to the golden visa law change. And this is like Ouro sobre Azul, so this is the perfect storm all over again. The very specific. I have a paper on urban geography where I explore that if COVID changed anything in the real estate dynamic. And I start with the question, did COVID gave a cold and a fever to the real estate housing markets? And I'm not going to give you the question. You can read the paper. I don't know if it's open source, but I can give you the paper later. Yeah. It's, if you look for Luís Mendes, urban geography, you will, transnational gentrification, in Google, you will find it. If you cannot find it, send me an email. And I can give you the paper, open access. Okay.
I have a microphone now.
Yeah, it's working.
I have a microphone now. I'm very powerful. So, do we have any other questions here in the room or at home?
Amy, are you there?
Yes, I
Oh, you want to say something? Hello.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the presentation. I think it's so important to talk about this issue. In my experience, it's happening all over the world. The way that we're seeing housing prices just get so out of control. But also, I really appreciate your conversation about the importance of merging experience and activism within academic settings, and what does that look like? I think that's one of my big struggles, being an activist and community organizer who's now getting my PhD, which is not something I necessarily see how those worlds meet. And so your presentation was wonderful. I was curious about something that I'm studying and really interested in is how are we seeing social justice issues as equally encompassing environmental justice issues? And I think when you're talking about urban spaces and housing, there's some really natural ways that those two issues can converge, but I don't hear it a lot in the discourse around housing rights and gentrification. And so I was just curious, in your experience, if you've, and the campaigns you were working on and related to COVID and housing, if you saw environmental justice or environmental rights coming into the discourse and conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much. A very important question. As a matter of fact, I would say that I cannot restrict the question that you made on COVID and pandemic times, but I can answer based on my 20-year experience as a board member of several associations and also an activist. And I can say, and also a researcher, but my main field is not social movements. That's the field of Tiago and Guya. But I can say that social justice and environmental justice and climate change, gender, post-colonial issues, all those different issues really came abroad and came unified during the last decade of urban struggle in Lisbon. I can give you an example. In the movement I'm a part of, I'm one of the coordinators, or I'm a part of the coordination of the IGOT-ULisboa movement, Living in Lisbon movement, which is a big movement with more than 60 associations, which for the Portuguese case, and just thinking in Lisbon, it's a very successful and very innovative social movement. Their aim is to put the right to housing claim in the political and the public agenda. And they did it, we did it. We in the broader sense. And we, as I can now look back, because this movement was created in 2017, until now, in these 5 years of evolution, I can say that we've evolved from a group that was very, and I can see that also in the spectrum of intervention in collective claims in the other social movements in all Lisbon and Portugal. I can see changes in the discourse. We began usually in 2016, 2017, with the main axis of our urban struggle. Our main claim was the right to housing. Okay, we need to provide homes for everybody. It's a claim that is all over the main metropolis in the world. We know that. It's not new here. But as the years go by, I noticed the movements and the collectivities engage with gender issues, like mulheres na arquitetura, or like women in architecture, a group of activists and academics also that work for the right of women in the right to housing for women. As to the environmental issue, for instance, I saw in Morar em Lisboa was one of the movements involved in a big urban struggle on a plaza that we have in Lisbon, that is Martim Muniz, and it's an urban plaza. It has all different kind of multicultural appropriation, but the city council said, with no public participation, we're going to build a retail center, an open air shopping center in the plaza. And people all over the city, even the elite, were against it. I mean, we are talking about hundreds of people that were against it. And it was created a big movement because the claim was to create a garden, a big garden in the center of the city, in Martim Muniz. And the city council just said, no garden. We are going to commodify the space and we are going to, como é que se diz concessionar, Tiago, to rent the place, to apply, to lease, thank you so much, to lease the place to a private real estate owner, and he will promote the shopping center, the open shopping center. The project was horrible in terms of architecture, and it was against the public will. They didn't want, people didn't want another shopping center. They didn't want a commodified space. They wanted a green space. They know that Martim Muniz need urban regeneration. Everybody knows, because it really seems like an abandoned space, but it has so rich, dynamic, and yes, vibrant and social appropriation by people from Cape Verde, Angola, Bangladesh, Nepal. People, the Pakistanis play cricket. And the Indians, they play cricket in this place. So it's such a multicultural and rich place. And so, but people wanted a garden. This was so, the movement was so strong, unified so different collectives. Even the Lisbon Tenants Association was with this movement. They put, they created a courthouse, how can I say this? Eles colocaram uma ação em tribunal. They put an action in court against this, the movement of, yes, and they won. And they won against the city council. So the city council was obligated to do a participatory process that now ended. And now I'm in the city council deputies chamber as a scientist, so I passed the eyes on the report of the public consultation. And so that was, I think, a good example, Amy, of how different and just to end, I saw in this last 5 years a shift in the gravity center of the claims of the social movements. Usually the movements were more centered in different own specific claims. And in the last decade, they understand that if they attack not the real estate speculation, not just gentrification, not just and specifically deal with the specific and local claim, but if they attack the global uneven urban development model of the city as a holistic, integrated, if they aim and they fight that model, they will achieve more transformative. They get critical mass, and they are a bigger platform to achieve social, spatial, and environmental justice. So these 5 years, that's the thing that another lesson, another final consideration that I would like to stress. They really, I mean, this is very specific, but very powerful. Different movements understand that they have to unify themselves to be more proactive and to achieve some transformative power in the city. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that example.
And the movement is called, sorry, Tiago, the movement is called Jardim no Martim Muniz, não é? Portanto, Garden in Martim Muniz, it's how the movement is called.
Okay, thank you. We still have 10 minutes. You guys want to ask anything? Yeah.
Hello. Thank you very much. I learned so much. I don't study urban movements, but I was here when this on the spike regarding, it was 2019. I think.
Yes.
Yes, I remember that.
2019.
I
Yeah.
think I went to a meeting, and I remember that was really exciting. And I don't have a very good question because I'm still thinking a lot about everything you said. But in the end, when you talked about the 3 arenas, that got me really curious, and I want to hear more about your thinking about the political, academic, and civic actors and the kind of gentrification. So
Okay.
we could talk about that.
Yes. So that's, I don't know if Amy heard of it. What's her name? Sorry. Luana asked here a question that she wanted me to develop a little bit more the idea of the necessity of overlap between civic, scientific, and political spheres and arenas to achieve transformative change. Well, I don't really, that's a thesis. That's why it's called a thesis. It's an hypothesis. I mean, it's something that I learned from my experience as activist and researcher and professor in politics. I'm in politics. I'm engaged in the political party. It's ethical of me not to say what's my political party, because that's one of the things that I transmit to my students is that please be involved in politics. That's very important. Even if you are in a more liberal economic, just develop your political agenda. That's important to really to give people a broader sense of mentality and really promote critical thinking. That's very important. So as a politic, but also as an activist and a researcher and a professor, I would say, and I learned that these 3 arenas, when they, not just when they interact, but when their leadership culture overlaps. So they just don't interact. They have to overlap the leadership culture and the main leaders. I'm sorry to be so, it's not an elite point of view. It has to do with the main people that are involved in the movements. When they overlap this and they really engage in relation and connection and interaction between these 3 scales, both in the multi-thematic point of view, as a multi-scale, because we are not talking about national or local or regional. We are talking about transnational and international overlaps. And when we promote this trans something, this inter something, it's not just scale, it's not just levels, it's not just thematics, because it's not just housing, environmental, gender. It's when we promote the trans something, the intersectionality between politics, civil society, scientific, we are promoting I don't know, it's a focus, it's a critical mass. I don't know how to say this, but it's a more, it's definitely, it's something that it's a rational that has more density and more hypothesis of being successful when you connect active citizenship with the political party system and the representative democracy system. You lubrified these different levels, you understand? You put ideas and practice to circulate. And this has to do, I'm not a sociologist, I'm a geographer, but this is important to put things here like habitus, social capital, cultural capital, different kinds of capital at service of the big cause of the urban common, or the commons. I wanted to do that appraisal in the end, but I couldn't. The apologetic, an ontology or a more how can I say, to stress the point of the need of the urban common. We need to work together to urban common, because that's the big clash that we see between two main paradigms in the contemporary city, is the profit paradigm and the people paradigm. You know, and the clash, the only way that we can give more power to the people paradigm and the social paradigm and the environmental, of course, when I say social, I mean broader sense, I guess, not economics, but capital. When we to lubrify that connection and to give more power to the social paradigm, we need to really strengthen and reinforce, you know, capitalize, mobilize the different strengths and forces between these three levels. Again, in a multi-scale, multi-level, multi-thematic, you know, background. Okay. I don't know. Maybe this is something that I learn when I read and when I practice activism. And usually this thing, if you want to read more, again, I'm a geographer. Tiago and Guya are the real specialists in social movements. I'm just a curious intellectual on these subjects. But the thing is that I learn a lot by connecting activism and theoretical field and academic field. And I learn a lot by merging these three fields, political, sorry, even poetics, some poetics in it, but political, activism, and scientific. And especially I learned that we need to, it's an interaction all the time. It's not just a connection. It's a circulation of ideas, practice, you know, all the time.
Okay.
Just to read more, if you want to read more about this, read always the last chapters of David Harvey's book. You know, Spaces of Hope is an amazing book. Cosmopolitans of Freedom, I think it's the name of the book. Anyway, if you go to Wikipedia, David Harvey, you have a bunch of, it's one of the, for me, it's the biggest geographer. He's a Marxist, but he's the biggest geographer and the most important one in the international field of geography and critical geography and critical studies. And in the last chapter is always the most interesting, because he always makes a perspective about how social movements, what alternatives, how collectivities can organize themselves. For instance, he doesn't believe in just horizontal movements. He believes that these postmodern, post-structuralist collective movements that are very horizontal lack verticality and lack connection with the old system of political representation, and that this is a fault, a limitation. Okay, he for instance, he advocates the connection and the coalitions between horizontal organizations and vertical ones, and there's different contributions and different from the theoretical literature on social movements. But I would say that this is one of the main theoreticals that I really appreciate and really open our minds for social movements and forms of urban struggle and organize, mobilize. Yeah.
Okay, I think we can finish here.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, you guys,
and
for having
we'll
me.
have the next session in July with Luca
Thank you, Amy.
Manucci.
Don't go away,
Amy. And it will be about, as I said before, his book on introduced about populism as a type of political action. This seminar is not only about social movements, but also about political action in a broader sense. And as such, Luca is also a communicator. He's someone that links his work with writing blog posts and so on and so forth, and showing the work and interviewing other people that work on populism. So you'll tell us a little bit about that and how we connect the academic and the more communicative world, so to say. Okay. Thank you so much.
Amy, don't go. I will just, okay, can I stop the record?
Yeah.
Okay.